So welcome everyone. My name is Luisa Oliveira and I am the Director of Public Space and Urban Forestry for the City of Somerville. And thank you all for coming out to the meeting. As with every parks project, we have a public process. This is part of that public process. We want to keep you informed of what's happening with the park design, but in this case also the remediation design, as we do with all of the different projects. So again, my name is Luisa Oliveira. Arne Franzen is here. He's the project manager on this project. We'll also have us joining in a little bit Oliver Sellers Garcia from the Office of Sustainability and the Environment. I also want to welcome the elected officials. We have State Representative Denise Provost here. We have City Councilor J.T. Scott here. City Councilor Willem Baugh is also here. Again, thank you all for joining us. And, I forgot to mention Jill Lathan, Director of Parks and Recreation from the City of Somerville, is also here. Did I forget anyone? So that's the city and elected officials. We have, because of the process, because this is a contaminated site, we have a licensed site professional that's working with the city. We have George Noslis from Weston Sampson, as well as Marie Rudeman. Both joining us, and they will be providing a lot of the technical explanations for what's happening at the field. From the Massachusetts Department of Environmental Protection, we have with us Chris Pyatt in the back and Eric Johnson, and they have both come to join us in the community process. We thought we would have some reps from the EPA, but it seems they're not coming tonight. But we have been working very closely with both DEP and EPA, and we'll explain what that relationship looks like in just a bit. To date, for Conway Park, we've had 4 public meetings in March of the 29th of 2018, immediately after the contaminants were found. Again, in December of 2018. In May 29th of 2019, we had a PIP meeting, which is a public information process. This is a formal and legal process, which we will talk about a little bit later. This is not a PIP meeting. We will have additional PIP meetings, but that one was. So to date, we've had 1 PIP meeting. And again, those have official things that you need to follow in order to be PIP meetings. And then today is December 16th, so that's the meeting that we have. So if you want to know where we post about these meetings, they're on all of our social media. They go in the local newspapers. There is a community note written. It's on the city calendar. Our language liaisons post them on their specific Facebook pages and their networks in Portuguese, Spanish, and Haitian Creole. And importantly, if you want to sign up either for the PIP process or to sign up for Conway updates, and we only send out the updates when we have something to update you on, you can find that on our website, and this is the URL to that. You can also just go to the City of Somerville and type in Conway, and it will direct you to that page. So lots of ways to stay informed. Please do, and please let others know about these meetings, because the more we can, more folks we can have in the conversation, the better. So a quick agenda. We're going to go through, many of you have been following the process, some of you not so much. So in order to get everyone up to speed, we're going to go through the background of the project. We're going to go through an overview of what has happened to date on the project, what the remediation plan is, next steps, and then questions. I want to ask you, Arne had mentioned these green pieces of paper. If you can please write your questions down and not interrupt for the presentation. We are committed to staying here as long as we need to answer all of the questions, but it's much harder to get back on track or to stop and be asked a question that's on the next slide. So if you don't mind holding your questions, we would appreciate that. Okay, the background. So this site was in the 1800s a bleachery and a dye works factory. So we know that in that time there were probably some pretty nasty things on it. At that time also DEP, EPA, all of these regulations did not exist. It operated with these kind of dirty industries on it until the 1930s. And we know from our records that we have conversations starting about it being an athletic field in the 1940s. In more recent time, it's been renovated in 1976 and again in 2001. Today, it's a playground and a splash pad. So at the top of the slide here on Somerville Ave, there's a splash pad here and a playground, which is heavily used by local daycare centers. And then it is one field that has multi-purposes. So it's one large rectangular field and then has two diamonds. Right now it's a U12 field, which is, if you're familiar with the field size, is a medium field. And it's used by soccer, football, ultimate frisbee, little league baseball, softball, and kickball. The field hours of use that we know from the last 3 years range from 1,400 hours that are permitted. Those are the hours that are permitted within our system, to the last year that it was open, 1,250. For those of you who have been following the conversation about fields, you know that peak hours, the hours from 3 to 10 o'clock on Monday through Friday, and then I can't remember the other hours on the weekend, but they total 910. And peak hours is a concept that's important to know because that's when everyone wants to use our fields at once, because most of the youth athletes are out of school from 3 to 10. The project overview, as you know, we have a fields master plan. This conversation was started in 2015. And in that fields master plan, we call for renovation of this field as a medium turf field. And then the second thing that drove getting started on this project was that there's a retaining wall with some structural issues. So the sampling all began because of these two things. First, trying to figure out how the retaining wall was going to be fixed. They had to take soil samples to know how will we dispose of that soil, because if we are removing soil, we have to check that it's not contaminated so that it is disposed of properly. And now I'm going to hand it over to George, who's going to start us with, that's when he entered the picture, as soon as we discovered that there were some contaminants. And he's going to go through not only the timeline of what's happened to date, but what those contaminants are and what they mean.
Thank you, Louisa. Well, again, thanks very much for coming. My name is George Naslis. I'm a licensed site professional with Weston Sampson Engineers, and my colleague Marie Rudemans here, who's a toxicologist and risk assessor. So we started work back in December of 2017, initially to look at the field, look at the area around the wall. We collected some data. We found lead and a family of compounds called Pcbs, or polychlorinated biphenyls, in the soil. So at that point, we decided that we needed to do some additional sampling, which we did in the winter, spring of 2018. We did some supplemental testing, and we found at that point that we had an issue. We notified the state, and we closed the park. The park had been closed throughout the winter, but we also closed the playground area. We met with DEP and EPA in around June of that year. We did a more detailed site assessment in the summer of 2018, looking at different options and trying to think through the regulatory side and the technical side of how we would get to closure and what the data meant. We continued in January and June of 2019, looking at remedial options and looking at a conceptual design for cleanup. We did additional field work in May of 2019. We did some test pits in some areas that we had suspected contaminants, and we'll show you the findings in a little bit. And we continued throughout the remainder of this year with conversations with EPA, and to look at a cost-sharing option where EPA are going to come in and do some of the cleanup for us, which is great. We had, as you know, there's the playground. There's two halves of the playground. There's the area with the slides and the swings and the splash pad area. After doing extensive sampling in that area, working with Marie, looking at the data, we concluded that the playground area could be reopened. So that was reopened in fall of 2018. However, we kept the splash pad area closed primarily as a precautionary measure, but also following conversations with EPA, they preferred us to keep that closed as well. So I don't know if you want to, Marie, give a little data summary on what we found in the playground.
Sure. In the playground, on the area that we have opened, the concentrations were all less than 1 part per million, which is the method 1 standard for that's acceptable for residential exposure, and that's why we were able to open part of the playground. And then, okay, and then this is a summary of the field. It's kind of hard to see because these numbers are pretty small, but essentially the gist of it is at the surface, the concentrations were at a level where there is no significant risk to human health. However, as you got deeper, and especially in that one corner of the ball field, the concentrations of PCBs got higher and higher, which is why we had to close the ball field.
So we did a fairly extensive sampling program. Up here you can see all the different points. We did borings that drilled down into the field. We collected samples in the superficial point in the top foot, and then the top 6 inches, then 1 foot below that, and then at 1 foot intervals down to about 11 feet. And what you can see on the plan here is basically red is bad and white is clean, and the gradation in between. So this is just below the grass. This is about 1.5 feet. You can start to see that we've got something showing up in the rear of the field at the end nearest the train tracks. And as we went deeper, we got to see these red bullseyes that you can see towards the would be the south. Let me get my arrow correct. Southwest corner. Yes. So. Yeah, so you can see in this area here, this is the ice rink, here's the railroad. So this is the area that we were seeing more higher concentrations. And as we continue to drill down, again, what these maps are showing, it doesn't mean that everywhere there's red that's where we had those concentrations. These are interpretations from the data points that we have, but it gives us an idea of where the contamination was. Went a little bit deeper, you can sort of see that it concentrates in the back corner. And we went through this, one of the earlier meetings, in quite a lot of detail. We also constructed some cross-sections. So for those that love this kind of thing like I do, you can see that this is one of the cross-sections through the fields, and this is another one. And basically, you can see where the contaminants are with depth. So again, what we're showing is at the surface, we have some level of contamination, but based on our assessment, not too terrible. But as you go deeper, much higher concentrations, and those require response actions and cleanup. I mentioned we did a test pit program. We had looked at the area of the field, and we were always struggling to where was this contamination coming from. You often see lead in urban soil, but to have high PCBs, we were wondering where that came from, and we had concluded that at some point in the past when they were constructing the fields, some contaminated fill had been brought in. We did a geophysical survey, which is a method where we basically bounce electrical waves through the soil to see if we see anything. We did a gravity survey, we did a ground penetrating radar, and we found some areas where it appeared that there was something below grade. We went back and did a test pit program. So what we see here, these are all called paper capacitors. They were very common and popular in the 40s and 50s, and we found a whole buried cache of these. And we also found some metal debris and some old crushed up tanks, but these particularly we know are sources of PCB. So we believe that this is the type of material that was buried in the mix, buried at depth, not at the surface where everyone's in contact with the soil, but these are the things that are still in the ground that need to come out. So what does this mean? Why are PCBs dangerous? And we'll have Marie give a little overview.
Right. So PCBs generally at relatively low concentrations will cause what they call chloracne, and that's usually the first kind of sign of exposure if you have kind of breakout in this acne. And then, of course, with additional longer-term exposure and higher concentrations, things like liver disease and liver cancer can occur. Oh, sorry. So things like liver cancer and liver disease can occur with exposure to PCBs, usually seen occupationally, people that are exposed over and over again. So at this particular site, the concentrations, again, at surface were relatively low, and when I did a risk assessment, and what a risk assessment is I assume that children and adults are exposed to the concentrations that we observed at the park, and I run an analysis for a certain period of time. For this analysis, I assumed that people were exposed for 30 years, and the surface soil concentrations were at concentrations that did not cause a significant risk. However, as we got deeper and the concentrations got deeper, they did cause a significant risk, which is why we have to do the cleanup. So because the surface concentrations were at an acceptable concentration, it's unlikely that there's a significant health risk at present, but we do have to clean up because of the concentrations that are at depth.
So this is important because obviously the first concern was, people have been playing at this ball field, and we wanted to have some sense of were the people playing at the field at risk. So as Marie indicated, these are very conservative assumptions that go into a risk characterization. We're looking over a 30-year period of exposure multiple times a week. And so what we found that we felt pretty good that, given the concentrations that we have at the surface, that we could, stand up here and say that we didn't feel there was a risk to those folks that have been out there. But of course, we do have concentrations in the soil. We're legally obliged, the city's legally obliged as the owner to clean it up. And this is where it gets complicated. We have to follow the Massachusetts state regulations per Mass DEP, and that's why I'm involved as a licensed site professional. So that requires cleanup under one set of regulations. But because the PCBs are also regulated by the federal government and EPA, there's another set of regulations that we have to follow as well, called under the Toxic Substance Control Act, TSCA. So I just want people to understand this. There's multiple regulations that we need to follow. The other contaminant of concern that we looked at was lead. As I mentioned, lead is quite common in urban settings, but we also evaluated the lead concentrations. However, by and large, they were not that significant, especially when you compare them to the PCBs. We didn't feel they were particularly elevated, certainly compared to other sites that we've seen. So it's not a typical parks project. I think that's the lesson after hearing what we've been talking about, if you haven't heard this before. We're trying to construct a new park in a site that needs to be remediated. And the city is in what's called the Massachusetts Contingency Plan. That's the legal requirements. That's the regulation that they have to follow. And as licensed site professional, we're helping the city and guide them through this process. So I think last time we were up here, this was pretty much where we got to. What you've heard today was what we've presented before. So now we're getting into the detailed remediation plan. And what we want to leave you with is the concept of risk. Many people feel that, or some people feel that we want to remove every last gram of contaminated material. We can do that, but obviously that requires a lot of impact. That requires a lot of cost, a lot of impacts to the neighborhood. What we look at from our side is how much cleanup do we need to do to protect whoever's using the site. So it controls exposure. By controlling exposure, we control the risk. So that's kind of where we're coming at this from. Again, regulated through Mass DEP under the Massachusetts Contingency Plan. That requires licensed site professional oversight. And under US EPA under TSCA, which applies to all PCB sites. And that has an approval process. So as we started looking at this site, we always thought it'll be a combination of some removal and a capping type cover scenario. As we started getting into that, we spoke with EPA. They have a removals program. It's called Emergency Removals and Response Program, the ER program. They actually, in some circumstances, will provide funding or service to help clean up contaminated sites like this. They typically will only go in and address really contaminated sites, and typically only where there's direct contact. So they would deal with illegal dumping, for example, or transformers that are at the surface, those kinds of things. But we have worked with the ER program on a number of sites where they actually partner with the community and help get this site to clean up, which is a great resource. And so we've spent probably over 6 months speaking with EPA, getting them involved, looking at whether they're prepared to help, how much they can help, how much they can do through this program. Would they want cost recovery from the city? And we got to a position where, yes, they are willing to help, but their funds can only be used for remediation. They can't use their funds to construct a field or anything like that. But they can come after the worst, the highest concentrations and the worst part of the highest concentrations of PCBs, or the worst contamination. So this is really good news for the city because EPA wants to partner on the cleanup of this project. So we've got to where we are today is working through a cost share program. We call it cost share because the EPA can only give so much money. They can't go after everything. They can't build a field. So it's a partnership with the city. So we're in a moment right now where we're working with EPA on what will they do and what does the city have to do. So we kind of broken it down. There's a pre-remediation site prep phase. So as you all know, the park right now is basically mothballed with the exception of the part of the playground. As we get through the pre-remediation, that's basically preparing the site for cleanup. We're going to have to put a more substantive fence around. We'll put up a dust screen. We're going to close off the entire site, including the playground, as we build an access road into the area so that they can come in and dig out the areas that they need to do. We'll build a decontamination area for vehicles going in and out. We're going to monitor for dust. We're going to have dust control measures in place. We're going to have specific active work zones. And we'll be obviously open and transparent with what we're doing throughout this process. So that's the pre-remediation stage, getting the site ready for cleanup. Then we come in with the remediation steps. So everything in red is work that EPA will do, and everything else is what the city needs to do. So the EPA will come in after the pre-remediation steps are done. They're going to excavate those deeper areas that we showed you, the big red blobs down at depth. And that's great news because I can tell you from experience, it's not easy to dig deep. As you go deeper, it gets progressively harder and therefore more expensive. So they're going to come in with their contractor and address the highly contaminated areas. They're going to take some of the shallow soils that are less contaminated. You'll see this number of 50 parts per million. That's like the magic number. If we remove, and the EPA's agreed that if we can remove everything over 50 parts per million, that they will allow regulatory closure. It passes risk. We've looked at the risk, and it will get us to where we can get through this process. So then they're going to backfill some of those deeper excavations with some of the shallow soil. Following that will be removal of and disposal of soil. A lot of that's got to go off-site, and you have two categories of soil that have to go off-site. There's a highly contaminated material, which is very expensive to get rid of, and then the other materials, which are less expensive, but still not cheap, unfortunately. For those in the construction business, you know that right now it's very difficult to find anywhere to take soil right now. So that's a challenge for the job. After we've removed the top, EPA is prepared to remove the top 18 inches. We will look at installing a separation fabric, a barrier if you like. It's called a geotextile. And that basically separates what's left in place that's dirty and what is clean on top of that. And then we'll construct the field above that. It's a very common process. It's how this is done. And so this is kind of the approach that we're talking about. So as you can see on this board and on the screen, these areas are where we have the highest concentrations. Now, obviously, the contamination isn't going to fit in a nice little box. Everybody realizes that. But this is what we drew up to come up with some cost estimates. Each of those boxes and rectangles, they're all slightly different depths. So some of them go very deep, some of them go less deep, but this is the area that EPA is prepared to dig out. And then they're prepared to take some of the other soil, put it in the hole, compact it, and bring it back up to about 18 inches below grade. So this is some cross sections that you saw earlier. So if you think about it, where the red areas are, this is where they're prepared to go. And then some of this stuff at the top here, we're going to put in the hole. Just like that there. So, so the idea is the higher concentrations get removed, and we take some of the superficial material and put it in the hole. The area backfill will contain less than 50, but again, everything will be left below a geotextile membrane, and then we'll have the field constructed on top of that, and we'll talk about the field construction in a little bit. So we get into a scenario of trying to, one, make sure that whatever's left in place is safe for everybody to play. That's priority one. That's what the standard I'm held to as a licensed site professional, is to make sure human health and the environment are protected. Working with our partners from DEP and EPA, that's the first priority. Then we look at how we do this, the logistics, the cost. How much soil do we take off? For every truck that goes off, we need a backfill. So we look at what can we do that gets us to this end goal, but has the least impact to the neighborhood, because we're talking a lot of trucks in and out. And obviously, the less soil we have to remove, the quicker the job gets done, the quicker we move on to field construction. So this is the general concept. One of the questions that's come up is, can we save trees? So we've had a look at that, and it's going to be very, very difficult because most of the trees are in the contaminated area. So I know this is not what a lot of folks want to hear, but right now we're thinking the trees will need to be removed. We've talked with EPA and DEP and my colleagues who've done, we've all done this work before. Is it possible to dig around a tree root ball? And it really isn't, unfortunately. It gets very, very difficult. So we want to minimize removal if we can, but we think most of the trees will have to be removed and then replaced. So the idea is to replace, the current field with a U14 size field, which matches the programming desires of the city. And then we'll try and create some space around the edge so that we can put in some trees and replace those. So there's a couple of options. How do you create a field? Well, the standard approach is a minimum of 3 feet of clean fill if you're going to go with a natural grass field. And the challenge there is we start to look at grades. If we build up the grade higher than what's there now, other than for drainage, we start to get into needing retaining walls. We impinge on the railroad at the back. And that becomes complicated from an accessibility side as well. So we really, in speaking with the city, have kind of concluded we kind of need to be sort of at the same grades that we are. So one option is you dig down 3 feet, you build it back up. That requires a lot of soil to be removed. The other is the alternative cap cover system that DP has allowed in many cases. I've worked on projects where we've done an alternative cap, and that's the synthetic field option, where we only need to go down 18 inches and we can build it back up. And actually, that provides, in my opinion, a better barrier for what's below. And then under the mass contingency plan, once we're finished with the whole construction, we close it out with a risk assessment and an activity and use limitation. And what that basically does is lets everybody know this is how we closed out the site, and this is, if you're going to do any future digging, this is what you need to do. So, Louisa.
Sorry, we're doing a lot of talking. This is actually a very complicated project. Before we get into the options for what is built on top of this, I want to make it very clear that this project is estimated to cost between $5.5 and $6 million. Yeah, that's what we said too. And we are very fortunate in that through this program, the EPA can do a cost share with us. So we want to be mindful of the fact that we are, one, legally obligated to remediate this site, and two, that it's very, very expensive, and as George mentions, has some disruptions to the neighborhood. The EPA and the DEP, while they work with us in the LSP to make sure that we're following the regulations and following the procedures and being very safe in whether we're removing this through the neighborhoods, dust control, et cetera. They do not decide what gets put on top of the remediated site in the end. So we are trying to kind of get this so that you understand the empty the hole, take it away, fill the hole. After that's done, there are two options, and we want to essentially walk through these and explain the decision-making that the city has had. So in a synthetic turf option, you would have to remove 18 inches of soil, as you can see, and then there's a larger granular material for drain. You would put the geotextile barrier down. There's a larger granular material that goes underneath for drainage. Then there's a smaller material, and then there is a attenuation pad, a shock pad, and then the synthetic turf and the infill. And this looks like this. This is that system at Capuano in East Somerville without the infill. So you can see the pad on top, that smaller rock. There's another layer of larger rock below it, and then the geotextile barrier. This is at the Capuano School, which also has an AUL and has a system where when we replaced it this summer, we just took the carpet and the infill out, and this is the subsurface. So just so that we're clear, again, this would necessitate removing 18 inches of soil. So the removal of the contaminated soil, the big hole, the backfilling with the clean soil, and then the city has to remove the remaining soil. So the EPA is paying for the backfill part. The city then pays to remove the remainder of that soil. Adding a required barrier that EPA pays for because it's remediation, installing the field subbase, installing the synthetic turf system the city pays for. And this looks like this. If we were to take the hole and put the soil back in there, that means that about half of the site, or 47%, is remediated to fill the hole, and then the city is responsible for remediating the other 53%. In the natural grass option, we would have to go down 3 feet, because again, this is one of the options that is acceptable, and put down a barrier, and then seed the grass atop it. So again, same thing, removal of the contaminated soil, backfill. City removes the remaining soil to a depth of 36 inches, which is twice the depth of the synthetic turf option. We add a barrier at 36 inches, install the field subbase, which involves bringing the soil back, clean soil in, so that we can see the top, and then installing the natural grass. Also noting that when you build a natural grass field, you need 2 growing seasons. So it means that the field would need to rest for at least a year, because the growing seasons are do not include summer. And again, the EPA funds can only be used for the red. So that, in our little cartoon diagram, looks like this. We remove the hole, and then we take, instead of at the 18-inch, we're at 36-inch, and we fill it. This means that 23% of the site is used to backfill the hole. The city is then responsible for removing the remaining. So just to be clear that the different options come with different remediation. So a comparison of the options that we did, how we looked at this and what we explored, looks something like this. The depth of the soil that's removed is 18 inches. It's in a synthetic turf field. It's 36 inches in a natural grass field. That equates to 4,300 tons of soil versus 12,400 tons of soil. And it means 145 truckloads versus 415 truckloads. The cost would be $650,000 to the city and $1.8 million to the city if it's natural grass. This would take about 15 months versus 17 months. The field installation would take about 3 months versus 1 month. It's quicker to build the natural grass field. But then we'd have to wait for a year for the 2 growing seasons. Now, in this comparison matrix, I want to be very clear that this is the cost after the whole and the remediation is done. So this is the cost to the city above our cost share with EPA. This is the kind of factors that we were looking at, that we've spent hours working with the LSP on, that we've spent hours talking to the EPA with. So what that looks like in summary is that it will cost $3 million plus the cost of the field to the city to build a synthetic turf field. It will cost $4.2 million plus the cost of the field, $400,000 of which is just bringing back the clean soil to fill that 36 inches to the city. It means 270 truckloads that are going through the city versus 540 to remediate those different levels of soil. In terms of start to finish, optimistically, it's 1.5 to 2.5 years. And then whereas a synthetic turf field allows from 10 to 10 at night, 3,850 permittable hours, we will be held to 500 to 800 hours of permittable hours, which at today's standard in 2017, we were at 1,250. So for us, this decision was clear. The seriousness of the contaminants, the cost of the remediation, the disturbance to the neighborhood, the timeline of how long it will take, and the hours of play. Whereas with a natural grass field, we have to remove hours, and we know that we have a crisis. If we do a synthetic turf field, we will not have to remove the hours that we already have. So we have decided that synthetic turf is the option that we will choose for all of these various reasons. Now, I know there have been a lot of synthetic turf conversations for a very long time. I have been, as one of the original authors of the master plan, I've been involved in these conversations since 2015. I know more about athletic fields than I ever thought that I would know. And I know that there was a recent conversation in the Boston Globe about PFAS, so I wanted to kind of give you some information on that. So the first thing, the PFAS, Marie happens to be an expert in PFAS, so if we have more technical questions, we can ask. But the last 3 fields that were constructed, the last 3 synthetic fields that were constructed in Somerville, Winter Hill, East Somerville, and Capuano, we have verified with the manufacturer that PFAS was not used. So that is not a concern that anyone needs to worry about. PFAS was not used in the manufacture of the carpet. We have been able to verify this information. Secondly, the 3 fields that were last made were done with either sand or a plant-based infill. So we hear the conversations that are happening around whether we're using crumb rubber or plant-based, and we have responded to those in the last 3 fields. We have spent this Athletic Fields Master Plan, if you haven't, it's a riveting read. 84 pages of the data of what our fields, what are the unmet needs for youth athletes in our fields, what are the information and the research that's been done about synthetic fields, what are the comparisons? So I direct you, it's on our website. Please have a look at that if you have additional questions. We often get told that we're trying to make everything a synthetic turf field. That's simply not true. You can see which fields in the master plan are slated to be synthetic or natural grass, and it's really a 5 to 6. All of these slides will be put online tomorrow, by the way, if you want to refer to them. So we're really not trying. The master plan was made to try to make up that delta of field hours that we're not able to give to city youth. So we're really actually not trying to make all of the fields synthetic turf. But it's also worth noting that the athletic fields can only happen in some parks because of their size. And the fields that we really have a need for are the U12 and U14 fields. So it's not that we're going to the largest parks and saying, we want a synthetic turf field here. It's that those are the only places that can accommodate them. Additionally, I would like to tell you that there are some very good resources, for example, on the City of Portland, Oregon site. They have gone through what are the different infills, how do they compare, and they look at them from an environmental cost, from a life cycle cost. There's some very good matrices and a very good explanation of their policy. Every different infill and every different material has pros and cons, and we try to keep up to date with those and try to use, for example, the Brockville that was put in East Somerville and Capuano. That is a latest technology thing. So we're really trying to keep ahead of this. So for the next steps, we have to go to the City Council and ask for funding to actually do the design of the field. This includes looking at the options for the trees. As George mentioned, there's a range of dimensions that qualify as a U14 field. We are hoping to go to the smaller of those official field sizes so that we can replace the trees. There's a large length of the retaining wall there that has to be replaced. That will necessitate digging very deeply down. We are having to finalize the scope with the EPA. We sit in these meetings and do a lot of math problems and volume problems of how will this work, where will the site be, where will you come in, where will the contamination site be, the decontamination site rather. And we're hoping to sign an agreement with the EPA for that very generous cost share. And then we would have to put out the remediation project would have to be put out to bid. We'd then have to put out the field project, and then we'd finally get to construction. So it's not an easy project. It's not going to be a short project, and it's not going to be one that isn't without, we have to get rid of all of this soil. We have to remediate it, and there will be trucks going through Somerville. So as part of this, there is a PIP process, and I believe that's DEP or EPA. There's so many regulations that I get them confused, but DEP does the PIP process. There will also be a public process through the EPA. We have to follow these rules, and we are committed to doing that. Again, all of this stuff is online. All of the past meetings that we've had are online, so we're trying to be as transparent and as informative as possible. Here's where you can both sign up to be on the Conway update, find the latest information, find all the past emails, as well as get on that PIP email. My name is here, Arn's name is here, and that concludes our very long and complicated presentation, and now we want to take your questions.
I kind of somewhat the timeline, but specifically looking at the playground, because it's now open, trying to understand how long the playground will be closed. While the remediation is going on, there's a lot of school, there's preschool that's right next door, there's arts and crafts next door, there's kids going in and out of the ice rink. How safe is it going to be for our kids around that site, and then also how long is the playground going to be closed for?
So the playground has to be closed for the duration of the remediation project.
Which is 15 months?
Well, optimistically, it's 15 months. And there's no way around that. The whole site has to be closed, and we're talking about things like, is there a security guard that's there? Are there cameras there? It has to be secured the whole time.
And then what about the safety of the surrounding area for the kids who are going in and out of the hockey rink and playing on the basketball court? I'm assuming the basketball courts will be open.
Yeah, so the area is set up as a site where remediation is happening, and there will be fences and dust monitors, but all of those things are done to assure the safety of anybody in the surrounding areas. So there isn't a concern about that. The concern is whether people are getting into the site.
I missed the beginning, I apologize, but in terms of like turf versus grass, if turf is laid down, does that preclude at some point in the future if you want to transition to grass?
So the question was, if turf is laid down, does it preclude the grass in the future? It does not. However, you then would need to remediate another 18 inches. Or, I mean, I don't know what's going to happen in 10 years.
If the regulations remediate because...
Right, so that's what we just spent the whole presentation explaining. So just to boil it down, it's an 18-inch remediation versus a 36-inch remediation. And natural grass necessitates that there's a 36-inch remediation.
And that's a regulatory requirement through the state with the Mass DEP. Because the synthetic turf is a more durable surface, you only need 18 inches of clean fill, whereas just natural grass would require 3 feet.
You're not implying that you're supporting
No,
fake grass, are you?
either will qualify under either one that they presented tonight.
So again, DEP and the EPA do not make a decision on what type of field system get put in. They just tell us it's this or that fall within the contingency plan.
Both of the options that were presented are acceptable under our regulations.
Did I understand correctly that you made the decision?
That's correct. And we just explained how and why we made the decision. It's based on the number of factors that are in this chart.
I see a bunch of heads turning to look at me right now.
We all heard the same thing. We all heard the same thing. Okay, but decided we're gonna have a turf field because you only need to remove 18 inches of dirt compared to 3 feet of dirt, which is a total different cost analysis.
So it's not that simple. There, again, I
I'm
tried
not
to.
that educated, but I can figure that out.
Right,
The
but
city spends
there is much more to it, and we tried to go through.
Don't cut me off, honey, after you grandstand.
Let's really make a.
I can lie on my shoes.
I live there, right on the park.
Okay, so I'm taking questions now. Who's next?
Yes.
Sir, you mentioned that during the remediation there are going to be decontamination areas and things like that, and parts of the playground's going to be closed and all that. How does that impact access to the rink? Not you addressed the safety issue, but what about the actual access if you have to build, entryways or roads and decontamination areas there?
So right now we're trying to assess where that access point will go in. It does not affect the rink or the property.
Okay.
If I'm
so you're
looking
treating
at
them as separate properties and okay. Thank you.
I have a question about the trees. So you talked about the 3 feet versus the 1.5 feet. The trees, you also said were in the more contaminated areas. So if you're going to do the synthetic field with the trees around, how does that work with maintaining that distance barrier?
So I drew a cross-section just for you, so I can explain how that works. Let me, aha. Okay. So the scenario that we're trying to work out, and again, this is one that we want to try to replace the most trees as possible, is that if you have the artificial turf field here, this is 18 inches, there would be some kind of barrier here, and then the trees would be installed. And usually a root ball goes down about 18 inches, and usually roots are moving laterally. So if you look at a tree in a tree well in the city, it's even less than that. There are some trees that have tap roots. There are some oak trees that have tap roots, but this is the kind of work we're trying to, the next phase of this in hiring a landscape architect who's going to design the field is to figure out exactly how this will work. And none of us wants to remove all of these trees, but there isn't really another way. So our real thinking has to be about how can we replace as many of those as possible. And this is one kind of system that we're exploring, like how could this work? Is that clear?
And that would, resistance waste, because there's a barrier that will not be endangered by the trees.
Yes.
Yes. I understood you to say that Weston and Sampson is the licensed site professional working on the site. Has Sampson and Sampson also bid on and constructed for the city and in any of its other turf fields, since that's another unrelated part of it?
So the question is, has Weston and Sampson, which in this case they're licensed site professionals, so they're not in the business of constructing fields. They're in the business of technical laws. Weston and Sampson is a large multidisciplinary firm. You're asking if the other landscape architects have built any turf fields?
If the company Weston and Sampson has built any turf fields for the city of Somerville.
No, they have not. There are 4 turf fields right now in Somerville, Dilboy, East Somerville, Capuano, and Winter Hill. None of them were designed by Weston and Sampson.
Yes. I'm really interested in the synthetic field in terms of knowing the research. I'm up on some of the research in the newer materials and using the more natural materials over the recycled type, the crumb, right, which is a lot better for health. I'm wondering if you can share which of the manufacturers were installed in the other 3 projects, and who, if you know yet, who you're going to be speccing options for this, and if they have health product declarations for these products, which could help for all of us to understand what the health implications are of this product as compared to the older products.
So again, the best information that I've seen on this is on the City of Portland's website, where they do a matrix that looks at not only possible chemical exposure, because some of this stuff is still in debate, but also life cycle, environmental, all of this. So I encourage you to visit the City of Portland's website. As to the other 2, East Somerville and Capuano are a product called Brockville. And if you go on the project page on the city's website, it connects you to their information. And there's a form that they give you, like a product safety form, that is in there as well. And then Winter Hill is sand. So the Dilboy Stadium, which was built in 2005, that one was built with crumb rubber, which was kind of one of the very few options that they had back then. But the last 3 have been built with either a mineral-based or a plant-based infill. Does that answer your question?
Not really. I was wondering who the manufacturer of the synthetic grass is.
So there's a lot of components to the system.
Right.
If you're asking about the carpet itself, on those last 3, the manufacturer is called AstroTurf. And again, you can find all of the product safety information on their websites, and we called them to verify that the PFAS was not used. Yes.
Hi, I'm from Parks and Crafts. We're like right there. We run a kids organization right there, and we don't have an opinion about the field. So, but the playground we use every single day, and in the summer, along with a lot of other organizations, there are hundreds and hundreds of kids on that playground every day, and they're different age groups. There's the little ones over at Kesher who are like 3, and then there's the big kids playing basketball. And so 2 years ago when this first happened, which was just kind of sudden, we understood it was sudden, everybody convened on the basketball, and you had a lot of like activities that did not go together, like teenagers playing basketball and three-year-olds playing in the corner, and our kids just being like crazy 4th graders. We were able to work with the city. It was great last year to make this sort of weird little area, this alley, which solved the problem. I wonder if it's going to be 15 months, is there a part of this plan to solve that problem? There needs to be a play area. I'm not talking about like the best slide in Somerville, which is Conway Park slide, best slide. A play area for kids that are not teenagers playing basketball, and with an area for like very little kids that if they get knocked over, it's kind of
So we hear your concerns. We know how many people are on there. We worked with you last time. There is nothing that we can do about the fact that the entire site has to be shut down. That, again, falls under the purview of making it a safe remediation site. I wish that there were, but there is not. So we're happy to talk to you and work with you on other possible solutions. But the understanding that I have, and I think, George, you've heard the same, is the entire site has to be shut down, and the entire, because we need an access route to get there, and because of the possible contaminants, and having to control those contaminants to make sure that there isn't any safety issue.
But this plan doesn't include anything to address that coming train wreck of 15 months of people.
Because
trying
there
to use
isn't
space, but
anything
there's
that we
not-
can do
not
to
the way.
address the coming train wreck. In other words, the site has to be in its entirety closed off because of the severity of the contaminants and the process of moving those contaminants.
Although there is a basketball court there, there's the indoor soccer field, there's the parking
There's
lot,
the
like there's
hallway.
space.
There's that place with the
space to
flag.
possibly do
Yeah.
something.
Oh, so we are, if you're asking, can we work on these other things, we're happy to work with you as we have in the past. If you're asking, can the playground be open?
That's not what I'm asking. I'm
Okay.
asking, is there something in this plan to solve this problem?
So
But there's not gonna be a playground.
right now, there isn't a plan, because there will be a plan, but we can have other conversations about using the adjacent spaces to meet your needs. We're completely open to that. I think some of it might belong to DCR, but I think we're happy to work with you on trying to accommodate your uses. That is not a problem.
Yes.
Hi, my name is Lynn Weissman. I live on Bellman Street, and we've used that park for many years for different things. I am a little more than surprised that there's no public comment, that the decision has already been made without any public comment. I personally am a little concerned that there's there's a lot of questions about sort of the grass blades, the artificial turf, it's plastic, and that we may be replacing one toxin with another. So I have that concern. There's sort of other costs that I don't know have been built into these estimates. I mean, I'm sort of thinking about the heat sinks in Somerville, and that turf gets really, really hot, and in some parts of the year it's actually, barely playable for, comfort purposes. Just sort of the climate piece of it, and the heat sink versus, grass is relatively cooler than other areas.
So Lynn, if you would like, I can address those so that I don't forget them.
Okay.
And then we can get to your other ones. So there has been a public process. There continues to be a public process. Again, this is not the same type of parks project where we can say to the community, well, should we use this slide or this slide? There are some very large and important legal obligations that we have to comply with. And even though, again, EPA and DEP does not say which is or which is not the field option, my hope was that we explained all of the factors that went into that decision. And you can continue to be involved in the public process for it. In terms of the heat, there are two things. I think I shut the whole, hold on. I thought you might ask me this, so I wanted to give you some information on that. So there are two things with the heat. One is that, is the synthetic turf field hotter than a natural grass field? And the answer for anyone who's been on one of those is yes, that is true. And in all of our field signs, we very clearly say, if it is too hot to be on this field, you should not be on this field. I mean, that is something that the adults have to make that decision. The hydration is very important, but on days of extreme heat, nobody should be on a synthetic field, a synthetic turf field.
There will be more days of extreme heat. And my
That's correct.
understanding is that trees aren't planted next to the turf fields because they tend to create bumps in the fields. Most of the artificial turf fields have no trees right next to them.
I don't know what, I can't answer that because I've not seen that. As again, we are trying to plant trees next to the artificial turf field. So that limitation is not one that I'm aware of. The secondary question you asked was about the heat island effect, and does this contribute to heat island effect? And not only do I have a slide, but I have a colleague here for that. Oliver is from our Office of Sustainability and the Environment, and he's going to, let me see if I can find the slide. Oh, wrong direction, sorry.
So, why don't I start while you look for the slide, because it's not the most important part. So my name is Oliver Sellers Garcia. I'm the director of the Office of Sustainability and Environment, and I'm gonna maybe just talk like very quickly about this, and if there's other questions, I can go into more detail. But I'm gonna leave the part about what it's like to play on the field on a very hot day to the folks who are more working on actual field design. But with respect to heat island and heat sink, there are a couple important things to think about. So artificial turf fields are actually not known to be a heat sink, and that is defined as a material, a place or a material that absorbs heat and retains it, in a much more significant level than the ambient area around it. So think about a big asphalt parking lot that really can stay hot hours after the sun has gone down relative to another surface. And then the other thing to think about, because this is what I think about all day, is what role this plays in heat with respect to climate change, which, as you said, is something we're going to be seeing more and more hot days. And so we have to really think about what does a hotter environment look like, and so you hear the phrase urban heat island a lot. And I do want to point out that what you see on this map is really that, oh, well, you don't really see it because the colors are terrible on this projector, but what you would see is that the whole Boston metro area is an urban heat island. What you see, I'm going to step away from this microphone, is that okay? It might not be recorded, but this whole area here is yellow and orange, and where you really start to see a difference in temperatures, surface temperatures, is out here. Oh, well, okay, too late for the pointer, but, and so, what we're looking at is a large areas of land use where there is a lot of asphalt, which is primarily roads. That is what we're talking about in terms of urban heat island. So of course there's little hot spots which you have to treat on a sort of activity basis. So a field where you don't play at a particular hot day is just like a bus stop where you have to make sure to plant a tree because it could be difficult for someone at trying to take a bus at 2 o'clock. But it's not really about the overall urban heat island. So maybe that answers some of your questions. And I'll stay up here to answer some more.
Yes.
So, with Argent's now Lincoln Field being turned into grass, or being rebuilt with grass recently, do we have a record of what percentage of permittable hours were actually not usable due to weather?
So the question is, given Lincoln Park was a grass field, what are the number of hours that were not used due to weather? And this is specifically when it rains and it's too soggy that the games or the practices have to be canceled. Jill, do you have?
Mark, we canceled the fields about 27 days between last spring and this fall.
How many?
Rainouts.
27 days.
27 days for rainouts.
Okay.
Just for when we opened in the spring, for fall. So fall just for Lincoln itself.
So from spring to fall, we had to cancel 27 days for rainy weather.
I'm sorry, but can I just interrupt for a second? I just want to make the point that when we redid Lincoln Park, that field is a state-of-the-art field. So that has the best soil mix possible for a natural grass field. That soil mix is actually 80% sand, and so it drains faster and is more, can stand up to more use than any other type.
So it's a high-performance athletic field. That was the specification that was built to it. I'm going to let this gentleman here who started speaking finish up.
Oh, and then do you have any projections based on what we've seen over the past couple of years as to how many hours would be lost if Conway was grass? Since you said 500 to 800 hours of permittable hours, does that take into account weather, or is that just based on, the hours that?
So the hours that are dedicated to being permitted are based on two things. One, the city set a policy that when we invest in a state-of-the-art new athletic field, it would be held to 500 hours for rectangular fields and 800 hours for diamond fields. And that's why we have the 500 to 800 hour range. That is not set in stone. Had Lincoln been performing beautifully with more hours, we would continue to permit it more hours. That's not the case. The permittable hours for synthetic turf. So right now, our natural grass fields are permitted as if they are synthetic turf, with the exception of Lincoln. So as you saw, and I have more graphs with more usage data, in 2017, that was 1,250 hours. It would then, if we did natural grass, have to go down to 500 to 800. And so, yes, there are some variabilities. If it's too hot, you lose playing hours on a synthetic turf field. If it rains, you also lose playing hours on a natural grass field. So those are the kind of weather variabilities that we can't control for. So those numbers are not set in stone, but those calculations were done without those weather variabilities.
The only reason I ask is because I know from having kids who play soccer that we've lost over the past 2 years, we've lost significant numbers of practice and game days because of the weather and the fact that they've scheduled on grass fields. And so the fact that the city's chosen synthetic turf for Conway makes me kind of happy.
Jill, did you want to address some of the hour?
I just want to talk about Lincoln. Okay, so yes, Lincoln is a high-performing grass field, and yes, we're grateful that we have this phenomenal opportunity here in Somerville. I just want to be honest with you guys. Regardless of that, youth soccer still had to decrease the amount of time that they needed to use on Lincoln Field. All right, due to rainouts, due to uses, which over like casual uses, working with the school department to kind of help them offset some of their uses, either on the playground during their recess or before school. But youth soccer, even though they were permitted during this fall season, they were still able to lose hours. So thank God youth soccer had a very conservative kind of mindset and really cared about the longevity of this soccer field. But they actually had to decrease the amount of time on that field because it was a natural grass surface. That's the honest truth about Lincoln. And so I have some from the MyRec data, from the permitting data. We had approximately, I guess, over 200 something hours permitted to youth soccer. But in talking with the youth soccer this evening, some of those hours are less just because they felt like they had to cut back some, and some of their game times were cut back. So I'll be getting an updated number from youth soccer. But the reality is, yes, youth soccer had a great field to use, but they had to cut back on uses because of different conditions with the field.
So just because I have a lot of graphs tonight, I want to be clear to let you know that this data is all here. This is all in the field's master plan data and in the updates to those fields. It's not a situation of, well, we really prefer synthetic turf. It's a situation of these are the hours, the shortages that we have for requested permitted hours that we can't accommodate on our existing fields. So all of this data is public information, and this presentation will be put online tomorrow. Did you have a?
Jake. I was just going to piggyback on what Jill said. I'm Jake Wilson. I'm with Somerville Youth Soccer. I was one of the aforementioned youth soccer people. We basically gave our permit hours back to the city. I think the entire month of November. We had permitted up through the 12th, and we said we can't use it anymore. It's torn up. We're going to be destroying this field. We're done.
It was done in 9 weeks. Time was open.
September 1.
September 1 to the end of October to Halloween.
Yeah.
The field became unsafe and unusable in 9 weeks.
Had to be moved over the truck. The
finish the season for U12. So we had a reline drum, we use double usage drum for U10 and U12, because we have an over influx of children in that age group.
I mean, things are
It
very
just
even
keeps
tighter
going
now
and going and going.
because Conway is closed and has been, so that's really caused a strain. David, did you have
I
something
do have
else?
some questions. First, are there going to be football goalposts put in at Conway for the high school team practicing? High school football? No. Okay. Will the field be open to the public during or non-scheduled hours? Because I know Conway was locked up before unless you were using it, so it will be open to the public for casual use.
The current plan is so they would remain a fenced-in area.
And I know the timeline is 18 months post kind of construction. When do you expect that construction to start? Are we 12 months away, 18 months away, 24 months away?
So remember that slide with the next steps? Going to city council to get money approved for the design, doing the design, solidifying our agreements with EPA. We are working to get these things done as soon as possible, but they are taking a long time. So I couldn't give you a definitive. We're hoping within the next 6 months that we'll have that sealed up.
Thank you.
Tori.
Yeah, hi. I just want to correct the city and let everyone know it's not the city who makes the decision on what happens in this field. It's the city council. They approve the funds. So even though it's being presented as this is the decision, it's not. Respectfully, it's not. I see the city has closed ranks and has even convinced the Office of Sustainability that that artificial turf fields are not heat sink, and that is incorrect. And I'll send you literature, Oliver, to just inform you on that. So what I feel, obviously we are in a climate crisis, and that we are in a climate crisis because we have made decisions historically that that satisfy the immediate needs without looking at long-term effects. So this field was constructed in the 1970s. Perhaps someone saw, oh, we can, it's cost effective to use this field that's contaminated. There are no regulations, so we're going to use it. So this was a decision that was perhaps made without thinking long-term. See, there are a lot of youth here, and we are giving them, they will be inheriting a problem that is based on this kind of thinking. And I would hope that it is forefront in their minds that climate change and the fact that we have about 10 to 15 years to correct this problem, and if we don't, we will not have a livable planet and their future is ended. That this would be their concerns. Yes, I want them to play soccer. I want them to be able to play sports and get into good colleges. But there are other sports that we can look at. Crew. Crew is a great sport to have on your, to get into any college. We have the Mystic River. There's basketball. We have other sports. I wish I could offer my services and say, heck, I'd love to head a crew team for the youth because it would be a wonderful use of the river. So basically, what I really hope is that we put the environment first. I want to follow up with this AstroTurf company regarding the PFAS, because I don't know if you can make a synthetic carpet without using that. So hopefully the Toxic Urban Reduction Institute can do a test for us to make sure that, what's coming out of those who profit from artificial turf fields or, I'd like to follow up on that. And I have more to say, but I just want to, if we are thinking about the times that we will not be able to use that field in the summer, when we're expected to have, 20, over 30 plus 90-degree days in the upcoming years, that's going to affect the entire neighborhood there. I would ask those who are in the sports community who are insisting on artificial turf fields to consider the neighbors, to consider the use of that field for other purposes. And I ask the kids to really think about it. I would hope that Greta Thunberg is their person that they want to emulate, and that they know climate change is serious, and that this is going to be harmful. And plastics are not a solution, it's just another toxic substance. And so that's My 2 cents for now.
Lynn? No, I'm sorry. I
That's
thought you
okay.
were
My
asking.
name's Barbara. Sorry.
Barbara, sorry.
It's okay. I have a question, someone who just left. So her point was that right now there's a playground and trees and 2 baseball fields. So you're talking about having a U14 field, and that's what's going to be the artificial turf. That's the.
There's 2 baseball fields, a football field, the U12 soccer field.
It's a multi-use field.
Right now. Right
Yes.
now.
No,
Yes.
depending on for all of those sports.
So I just want to understand. So is anything being taken away, or you're just redoing how the fields are
Just redoing them.
allotted? Nothing.
No, our goal is to not take those uses away. And again, tomorrow the slideshow will be up, but we go through all of the groups that are using those fields right now. It's a multi-purpose field.
She just wanted to know. Yeah. So that was her question, not mine. I just wanted to make sure I asked.
Yes. So baseball, football, ultimate frisbee.
Soccer.
But that's all going to
Soccer.
happen on the artificial turf fields. That's
Correct,
the
as it
thought.
does happen right now on the natural grass.
And that happens in the yeah, I really see this as a really difficult thing because we need.
Thank you.
No, really. I mean, first of all, I wouldn't want your job. You know, God
Thank
bless you. You're doing great work. But it is really hard because we don't have enough places for people to play. But we also you guys ever wander into Cambridge in the summer? It's like 5 degrees.
It's the summer.
Hold on. Hello. I'm just finishing, please. Let's be polite.
Get back on track.
Quiet.
So she has the floor. Can we let her speak,
Can I
please?
please finish? It's much cooler in the city of Cambridge because they have a lot of trees, lots and lots of trees. And I live here. And more green, and I don't know how much artificial turf they have anywhere. So my concern is it's hot, and it's really going to get hotter. So I'm really torn.
So Barbara, Cambridge is much less densely populated than we are. I
Right.
hear you, I used to work for the city of Cambridge. If you go to Danahy Park, there are 5 synthetic turf fields just in that complex. And they have a lot more fields, so they're able to rotate.
So they have more space than we do.
They have a lot more space. We are the most densely populated
I know it's
city in
believe
Europe.
me.
Shanghai.
Believe me, I know.
So,
this is
so
one of the things that
thank you for
concerns us.
acknowledging that this is a difficult problem,
hard.
that there are a number of different factors, that we are thinking of climate change, we are thinking about health.
No, I know, and I know you are. I'm
But-
not attacking
but-
anybody. I just
Yeah.
I'm concerned about kicking an environmental problem down the road too.
Here, can I jump for a second? Pardon me.
Sure, Councilor Scott.
Thanks. My name's on the flyer, so I'm just going to take the privilege to use the microphone for just a second. I'm Ward 2 Councilor Scott. And I want to echo that it is a problem. The regulatory constraints we're under right now have meant that this field had to be closed for the last 2 years, and it's going to have to be closed for another 2 years no matter what ends up going on top of it. Because there's going to be a long process, a design process, and that's God knows how long it'll take to bid and hopefully find a bidder that'll hit a price we can work with, no matter what option the city goes with. And that's very cold comfort for the folks that are working hard to rearrange fields and rearrange their schedules and get their kids out to play. The answer for me is that we just need more fields. And I've been saying that for 2 years. We need all of the everything. And that's why I've already created I've already created 2 parks in Ward 2 in the last 2 years, right? They're not online yet, but they're coming. And all of that needs to, we need to keep pushing along. That's why I'm keep pushing for like an Interbelt Athletics District, let's put fields on top of every building we can. Now, when it comes to the choice for this particular one, I know when it said the city has made the choice for artificial turf. That's not a choice that is coming from me. That is the director of Public Space and Urban Forestry has made that choice, presumably in conjunction with the mayor, in discussion with the mayor, and the director of Parks. But that is the executive branch making that decision. Now, as Tori pointed out, they have to come to us for funds, and that's going to be a very complicated conversation because there are a certain amount of funds that we have to allocate in order to meet state and federal requirements for cleaning the site up. I mean, the third option that didn't really get put up out there, I think, although I'll defer to the Mass EPA guys, is we just put a clay cap on the top of it and call it a parking lot for the rest of eternity. That'd be a pretty cheap solution, but nobody in this room wants that. So, you know, the part of the, as we're going forward and talking about funding for these different options, because there's a stark money difference and a stark time difference on a certain horizon. On a certain horizon, a 1-year difference and a $2 million difference can seem like a pretty big difference. On a different horizon, it looks different. I mean, this is how far out are we looking at the lifetime of this field? And, you know, I went back and looked at it, and I think that, is it when it's over 85, we have to shut down the turf field and say you can't play on it?
No, not necessarily true. You can hose down the field.
Is 90 degrees? 90?
So the recommendation is that it is done because it is too hot for children to play on. And that is left to the adults that are taking care of these children.
Yeah.
Kids at Capilano, they don't take themselves off the field, they can play.
Never shut down the turf field because of heat or rain.
They play.
All right.
This is
So,
absurd to think that people are not gonna play because it's too hot.
Yeah.
Someone, adult says,
yeah, no, that's,
Never had to shut down the turf field because of heat
I hear it.
or rain.
No, I get that.
They rain, they play on. Only time you shut down the turf field is if the lightning strikes, everybody gets off, the field's closed.
Well, no,
Otherwise, that games are on.
I appreciate it, and I appreciate hearing from the folks in youth soccer how they feel about
JT,
about
I've been
safety
dealing with
for-
that field for 12 years by myself, okay?
So, now, this is just the guidance I've been given from the Parks Department about what they are going to say about when they're going to allow.
That is our recommendation, and it's on the signs, and we stand
Sports
behind that
on.
recommendation.
So I look at it and I say, well, in the last, back in 2014, there were 29 days that got, well, I was looking at 85 degrees. I'll look at over 90, but you said the number was 85. So, we have an analysis that says we're going to have over 40 days over 90 degrees in 10 years. And it's just going to keep hotter. I mean, this year was the hottest year we had. Now, it was a pretty wet year, and that was a lot of days of closure. But this year was the hottest year we've ever had on record, except for last year, which was the hottest year we ever had on record. So I understand that it's a complicated question, and I understand there's already been a lot of thought gone into it, and I appreciate your patience and letting me use this microphone.
Okay,
But
when we talk about the hot days, what time of year are you speaking about? Because the seasons that we're talking about regarding the athletics do not happen during those prime times.
Soccer's not made in November?
No.
Spring,
It begins
fall.
September through November, and March through June.
What about football?
Football happens the same time frame.
Same time frame.
They
In the
start-
fall.
Begin in
In the
August.
fall.
But you're not.
Practice starts in the summer.
But
And
then-
heat stroke. Heat stroke is real for soccer.
I'm not saying it's not, but what I'm asking is simply the days that you're speaking of, this 30 days, and I agree, it gets very hot. But can we at least put the time frame as to when you're speaking about these maximum hot days, which I believe are going to be from June 30th through August 30th?
No, I was looking at the National Weather Service data.
The majority, or 80% of them.
Yeah, it starts in May.
So
and
there
it
may
goes
be
till
a day
September.
or
Yeah.
two that fall into the active seasons for the student athletes, which I agree, you should, truncate your practice time.
Well, and
But
it's going to be important
it's
to
all
have a
manageable.
secured field, like they said.
Nobody in this room related to youth athletes, we are all mandated to be careful with our kids.
Mhm.
You are careful with our kids. Addressing the climate change can be done through other means. We can do an offset for all of these fields because we can't build a forest big enough. To offset the greenhouse gases for Somerville would require a forest the size of 128. True?
I'm just a guy who had people vote for him, and I'm just one vote out of 11. I'm just trying to acknowledge that this is a complicated conversation and one that I'm glad that's being had. I wanted to be very clear, though, that this is the recommendation of the Parks Department, of the Public Space and Urban Forestry Department, and of the mayor. and it's going to come to the city council for discussion and funding. And I have reached out to folks in the soccer community. I will continue. Hell, my door is open every Friday morning from 8 o'clock to 10 o'clock in the morning, and anybody can come down and talk to me. So I welcome you to do that. I just wanted to make sure to give you all the opportunity before we got to the end of the meeting. So thank you.
May I ask you a question?
Sure.
You've advocated taking a long view. Would you support not putting a playing field in, but turning it into an urban forest and having windmills and solar panels surrounding the other areas, including covering the parking lots that are covered with asphalt? Because that would definitely be the long view approach. That would you support?
I mean, honestly, we need to do anything we can to mitigate the impact of the giant amounts of asphalt. That urban heat map that was up there, it's a mistake to just say the entire metro region is a heat island, especially when you see a large red streak that goes right through Ward 2 that follows Somerville Ave and all the major parking lots.
So you were in support of getting rid of asphalt and planting additional trees in place of playing fields in Somerville, is that correct?
I'm in favor of getting rid of as much asphalt as we can and replacing that with trees. Now, we also need places to play. There's no question about that. I'm not saying we ought to plant over every playing surface.
Driving might be more difficult too.
Yeah, it might.
Especially with trees in the road.
Yeah, it might.
Okay.
Instead of putting fields on buildings, how about putting them
Thank you,
on solar
Councilor
panels?
Scott. Okay, I'm going to ask for your comments because you look like you could bring us back. Hi.
Sure, I'll stand because I'm a child.
No, I'm expecting big things from you.
Yes, my body, right. So, well, if there is an enforced limit for the temperature, it says it's enforced. But what, like, two of my friends had gotten heat stroke in one game, and there was no enforced. It must have been 90 degrees in the line, and there is no enforced limit. And I think there needs to be something that is done about that because two heat stroke in one game, that's not very good.
I agree with everything you just said. Yes, the adults that are overseeing the children playing should not let people play in extreme heat and keep them hydrated.
On the surface where you play.
Sure. That's one.
Yes, Claudia.
I'm in a butter to the park. I actually live there and I sleep there and I wake up there. Okay? I'm not one of these yelling coaches that's, telling us all the rest of us what to do. But I do want to remind you that, people do live on this park. Quite a few people abut this park. And I would not ever want to reduce the safety and the enjoyment of the kids, or even the coaches. The coaches obviously live for this. And I wouldn't want to reduce any of that. But, we can have it all. We actually can have it all. This city is spending hundreds of millions of dollars for infrastructure for out-of-state developers to make millions and hundreds of millions of dollars of profit.
So Claudia,
so let me get to my question.
Yes, please.
So why can't we have the grass and the kids and do it all, and the protection of kids so they don't get heat stroke? We can do it all. And so my question is,
so what is your plan for that?
My plan is the right kind of grass. There are grasses today, just like there's plastic that has evolved and is maybe better than the old plastic, but still not good. There's grass that has totally been hybridized. Some of the higher end communities are using it. They don't want, the higher end people don't really want the plastic. So their cities are using the hybridized grass. In fact, one of our state reps, Denise Provost, we had a hearing a few years back. She brought a pound of that grass in. It needs less water, less care. I guess it grows less. It stays at a certain level of height and what have you. And so it might not be as many hours as the plastic, but it might be enough that it pulls people all in the same direction. So, you act like you've already made up your decision. So I have two questions.
I'm trying not to act like anything, really.
I have two questions.
Can I answer that one concern, though? This is Ben Waldrop. Ben is the second person who has worked for the city who was hired specifically to care for our natural grass fields. They have been cared for with an organic regime for the last 3 years. And we have measurably seen a success rate in those natural grass fields. We had Tom Irwin, which is a high-end, like New England Patriots high-end field turf company, who came and worked with us, who has done all of the different tests, and we have seen a lot of improvement in our natural grass fields. I don't know about the magic field mix, but our fields have continued to get better and will continue to get better. Part of them getting better, however, is restricting the hours of use and assuring that people are not playing on them when they are soggy.
Can I ask my 2 questions?
Absolutely, just
Thank
wanted to
you.
address that first one.
So I think that, I'm advocating for a good quality, improved type of grass that's designed for this use. My question is, the gentleman said that the EPA, which is federal, was partnering with the city. And that, and so my question is, does that mean there's federal grant money being used at this site?
Yes, there is federal money. I don't know that it's grant
Is it
money.
federal grant money?
No, it is not. It is the emergency removals team who are going to do the work on behalf of the city to a value of approximately $3 million.
Is it federal money?
They're not giving money, they're giving a service.
They're not giving money.
work.
They're doing the
Oh, they're
work.
doing the work, not
For $2
giving
to
money for
$3
you to do
million.
the work. Okay,
That's correct.
that's helpful. And my other question is, you said earlier that, well, I guess my question is, you said that there is a public process, but is there a public process other than us coming to a meeting and you telling us what you're going to do?
Do you want to talk about the PIP?
Well, as you know, there's a public information plan in place for all the submittals under the Massachusetts contingency plan.
That's under the mass contingency.
Correct.
I'm talking about the summer, she said there was a summable process.
So under the PIP process, there'll be the reviews, the mandated reviews of all the submittals that go in as part of the planning and part of the work that the city's going to do.
Sorry, I meant about the grass. The woman asked about
Oh.
the grass and the fact that we were being told tonight that this is the decision that's made. Is there any process on that?
So what we tried to convey tonight is, here are all the factors that we considered when making this decision. We didn't make a decision without looking at the data and spending hours discussing this, both with our partners at the EPA, with our LSPs. You informed us tonight that you are telling us that it's going to be plastic grass. And then you indicated that there was a public process as it relates to the plastic grass. Could you please describe what that is? The PIP is under the Mass Contingency Plan. That's a state regulation. What do you mean about a public process in Somerville related to plastic grass? So from the moment that we found this contamination, we have had a public process. This is a public meeting where we very transparently and very carefully, as we tried to do today, explained the facts of this project. This is our 4th of those such meetings.
But you're not listening to me. So I'm trying to make the distinction that other than coming and you just telling us what you're going to do, that's not really a process. That's really just you telling me, this is what we're going to do. When I say process, I'm saying, is there another hearing? Is there an appeal process? Do we have a board to appeal this to? I'm talking about a real way that people who don't want the plastic can take a step. I mean, I'm trying to look for a true, real way that we could get something other than plastic.
I hear what you're saying, and I will say to you that you have 11 city councilors. If you would like to reach out to the elected officials, that is what you should do. We will continue to have public processes, even though you're feeling that if the public isn't making the decision, it's not a process. We don't feel that way. We're trying as much as possible to explain our decision making and to explain the pros and cons that go into making any of these decisions. We're trying to acknowledge that people have concerns and trying to address those concerns, and we'll continue to do so. But if you feel that that process is not satisfactory, then there are elected officials to whom you can speak.
I didn't say that you had to agree with us. I was
was just trying to figure out if there was a better process than you just informing us what you were gonna do. I appreciate your reminding me, and Ms. Torrey reminding us that it really is up to the alderman to approve the money or not.
Yes, sir.
Hi, I'm Sean Decker. I have 3 kids who play soccer, and so yes, I'm one of those coaches. And the hybrid grass that you talked about is used in Northern Europe, and it is injected like hair plugs, synthetic turf, about 5%, and about 95% grass, and it is highly turned over, and it's about triple your budget.
There's many varieties of that.
Fair enough. My question is, does the city administration or the city council have an opportunity cost number for the hours of lost playing time, either in the construction cycle that they can use to evaluate bids of compression or acceleration of schedules, and also as you've made your the evaluation between synthetic and natural grass?
I'm not sure that I understand your question. Have we done a life cycle analysis of how many hours the field will be closed?
In evaluating the contract, you have to evaluate the time of closure, and you can pay to accelerate construction contracts. Do you have anything to evaluate, is it worth it to pay 5% more to get 200 hours more playing time? You can't evaluate that without a number of opportunity costs in the playing time. Equally, if you look at the grass versus 500 hours versus 1,250 hours for synthetic, you're talking about an extra field and a half. Is there an opportunity cost assessment in that?
So the first question I think that you're asking, but I'm not clear that I'm understanding, is there a way to accelerate the construction process?
Having to deal with construction, and there's always a way, but there's always a cost. And if you can't evaluate the cost, it's hard to judge.
There's also that, again, we're partnering with the EPA, and there's a number of regulatory things that have to be in place. And they control that. They are our technical advisors. So there's not a speed up button on this. The second question that I think you're asking was about how much an hour costs on a natural grass versus a synthetic turf field.
My 3 kids are school age for only so many years. And if the city council is going to evaluate what they're going to pay for this, or how they're going to evaluate between the 2 field choices, will they take into consideration, or not? Perhaps they don't see it as a cost of thousands of hours of children not playing.
Yeah.
As you look toward the future, I looked at the future too. I tried to kill a coal, but that's a different one.
Can I answer that question? Yeah. So I love your opportunity cost question, and just to augment what Louisa said, until we get through the laydown of that barrier layer, it's really all a federally gated process. After that, the actual backfill and construction of field surface, whatever field surface and backfill extent that is, that's where you could turn the dial potentially on the speed of construction. And I think that absolutely needs to be taken into account.
So it's a 2-part, speed of construction, but also
and then the opportunity costs. And I'm gonna be honest with you, I think we could build a new athletic field in Interbelt faster than we could get this remediation done.
Faster.
And I wish we'd been cranking on that for a while. Now I know that requires the mayor to say, I am devoting resources, I'm committing the city's tax dollars to doing it.
It also requires a neighborhood plan, which hasn't been done for the Interbelt.
The mayor's done a lot of things without a neighborhood plan, respectfully, Director. So, I mean, it requires leadership from the executive, and it's one that I am happy. I've been calling for this for 2 years.
Well, you should run for the mayor.
So Sean, I would say please have a look at the fields plan, 84 pages, lots of charts for some of that information. And then the other, to your point about us trying to fill this gap, this is the plan for trying to accommodate that gap. And yes, if we could create 5 fields in Interbelt, that would be wonderful. But given that is not a short-term or mid-term option, we are trying to add other fields. There's a field for Somerville High School. There's another field being planned for the Healy Schoolyard. So these should bring us much closer to filling that gap.
Great.
can you clarify the number of permitted hours that are recommended for a grass field versus a turf field? Just when we talk about creating more fields in your belt, like a field, that's not going to be equivalent to a turf field in Conway, right? It's a bunch.
No, I'm saying we can put
it's a bunch
artificial
of fields.
fields, yeah. I mean,
Artificial, it's already asphalt now.
The ratio is 7-1.
So you say that's okay. Other people will
Yeah,
oppose to artificial turf anywhere, right?
Yeah, but there's no
let's be honest.
evidence.
Not miles
Well,
from my
I mean, so
house.
that's why I asked me about.
That's
Can we answer the
fine.
question?
I think the 500 hours that's being bandied about, like for Lincoln Park, it's not 500 hours. You did not get 500 permitted hours out of Lincoln Park.
Well, but what you're forgetting on Lincoln Park is recess hours.
But again, the number of hours that you were actually able to use Lincoln Park was well below 500.
And partly
Keep on
that's
saying
because of recess.
500, and our experience to date is that the promise of Lincoln Park has fallen short. So even if it's 500, what is the number of permanent hours that a turf field could be each year?
A turf field, so Conway, for example, is permitted from 10 until 10, Monday through Friday, and from 10 until 10. It can be permitted. It's not, again, the crunch is really during peak hours, and that's 910 hours. But potentially could be. If you wanted to play Ultimate Frisbee with your friend, you could go and play. That's 3,600
How
hours.
many hours was Dilboy permitted this year? Because that's used by
Funny,
not
you
only.
should ask.
Well, I knew you had the numbers. I can't read it, that's why I'm asking.
Let's see, Dilboy.
We use Dilboy off softball.
Well, we use Dilboy for just about it, and that's not just us, that's everybody because of the state involved.
2017, Dilboy Stadium was permitted for 1,527 hours. Is this just city use?
That's just Somerville, that's not the external.
No, that is all permitted use. All permitted use, so everyone, even Somerville, outside uses, the stadium.
$200 an hour,
That's-
or whatever it is.
Well, youth and adult rates, but yeah, it's different, yeah.
So, and also, again, these hours, they tend to be about in the 1,200 to 1,500 range because of peak hours, and the rest of it is outside of that. So while it's hypothetically you could permit a lot more, we all know that the real crunch is during peak hours because that's when kids are out of school.
What was the
Okay, and
number?
so just to clarify, so in terms of that peak hour usage, we're talking about 3 grass fields equivalent to 1 turf field.
It's 910 hours are peak hours, 910. So,
But we used 1,500 at Dilboy. If it had been grass, we would have been limited to 500.
Correct.
We would need 3 grass fields to get the same usage as Dilboy.
yes, if we're only thinking about field permitted hours, yes, that's correct. This is my problem.
Different people are throwing out different numbers. I want to
Yeah.
be very clear.
Yeah, and again, this will be up, and this work has been up. It's in the, if you just put in Fields Master Plan, this data is a few years old now, but it's pretty consistent with what we are seeing now. Did you have another question? Oh, I don't think so. Yes.
Couple other things that, as far as from a back's perspective, as Jill said earlier, 28 days were canceled this year due to rain, which totals for the spring and the fall about 20% of the scheduled usage on grass fields never happened. So that 3-to-1 ratio actually jumps to about 4-to-1 if you actually consider actual usage of grass fields. So, which is really kind of the whole problem is putting grass. And we also know from Curtatone that between the usage of the kids in the morning and 9 weeks of soccer, the field was done in. So maybe that reason why Cambridge can get away with it is they have fields that they foul once every 3 years. And we don't have that kind of space.
Yeah, so I also want to be clear that this, in some ways, the conversation is about getting hours for our youth to play on. It's not a turf is better than grass. We're trying to have a balanced approach. We're trying to have also natural grass fields and synthetic grass fields. We're not trying to just say, okay, everything is going to be turf. So there are pros and cons to all of it, just as there are pros and cons to the materials, just as there are pros and cons to the life cycle and the maintenance costs. So we are not really trying to just blanket this. In the case of Conway, when we did the Fields Master Plan, it was slated to become turf because it is our third heaviest permitted field. And we can't continue to permit it as it is permitted now as a synthetic turf field while it's natural grass. The quality of that field and what our athletes are getting, the safety of that field is not okay.
What were the two fields that were on the?
Dilboy and Capuano.
Now, Argentiano used to be the heaviest used field.
That is no longer the case.
No longer the case because after 5 weeks, I had to shut the field down and move everything. And Conway, I've moved water at Conway for 12 years to get fields going. I played soccer at Conway since 1982 for Somerville High. I've been in the city since 1975. I've seen the changes in the city. Okay, there's more kids playing sports now than there ever was.
So,
If we don't give them space to play, where are they gonna go? They're gonna go hide in their computers? God bless them.
so Ben, do you want to give just a quick
Please, Ben.
Can I just have a last question, please?
right after Ben
Donald.
speaks. Yes, you may.
No one wants to bring a dog on the grass field where there's no dogs allowed.
I don't have a dog.
So my name's Ben Waldrop. I'm in charge of the athletic fields in Somerville. I'm the director of operations with Parks and Rec. So I oversee all of our seeding practices as well as all the artificial practices as well. In regards to the seed you were speaking about earlier, we buy the highest quality seed you can. It comes from Oregon. There is no such thing as a wear-resistant variety. There are wear-tolerant varieties. I came from ag business in Arkansas, worked there for the last 7 years, so I've worked in seed practices for that long as well. We just overseeded Lincoln Soccer with a tall fescue mix, which is one of those wear-tolerant mixes. That being said, we had 26 closures this year as well, and the field looks like it does now. So I understand the natural standpoint as well as the artificial side as well, but we need to keep our ears and eyes open to the footprint, the carbon footprint that these grass fields do have. They're not a maintenance-free thing. You have to cut them with lawnmowers, so you're upping the carbon footprint that way. Rebuilding them. You have the seeding costs. The seed comes from Oregon. It's harvested with diesel farm implements. There's plenty of carbon footprint in there, and when that goes to global warming, that's the number one argument, the carbon footprint.
If there's 1,200 hours currently on the grass that everyone complains about, why would it go down to
No,
500?
500.
Okay, you said it
Yeah,
was
but
1,200.
She's right. Presently, Conway, which is a natural grass field.
Go ahead.
Presently, Conway is permitted for 1,250. What isn't part of that data is the condition of Conway. And from the beginning of the master plan process, we heard from folks whose kids were playing on there that these fields were overused. We do GMAX testing on them to make sure that they are safe enough for kids to fall on. And what we decided as a policy is that when we build a new natural grass field, it will be held to 500 for rectangular use and 800 for diamond use. And that's an adjustable number. If we could get 900 out of a natural grass field and the condition still passes all of our GMAX and other tests, we would adjust that. We have no interest in trying to not give more hours. Does that answer your question,
Well,
Claudia?
I think what you're saying is it's a low-ball number, and it could be much higher.
That's exactly not what I'm saying at all.
In
Just the opposite is what
experience at
I'm saying.
Argentiano is the opposite.
Well,
Okay, it's 8:21. We're going to take 2 more
12:50 now.
questions. And
I didn't
I
really
do
get
want
that
to
answer.
I do want to say we are 80,000 people. That's a lot of people. We all have different interests. We all have different opinions. We hear a lot of them often. And we are really trying to balance our park system so that there is something for everyone, so that we have fields that are performing, that are doing ecological functions. We have parks that are dedicated to that. We have other parks where children are allowed to play. It's not an easy task. There's a lot of us. So with that, I'm taking 2 questions, and then we all have to go home. Yes.
Maybe a little bit more of a statement than a question. So I'm like this right now. I am a mother whose kids have played at the soccer, and I've had soccer canceled on me many times. I've also had my kid before the playground, the Capuano was redone, digging his hands in the crumbs and feeling very uncomfortable about that. I'm also the executive director for an organization that focuses on the sustainability of the built environment. And this one from environmental, social, and economic standpoint, it's very difficult, and I don't know if there's a right answer. I do think that the synthetic fields, that there have been incredible advances in them. And just looking, there's a great article in Building Green that is, in my opinion, the best source for building materials or construction materials that really starts talking about these alternatives, and that particularly the geofill, I think you said you used a different one, but geofill, which is made out of coconut husks, and another one that's made out of cork, actually take that urban heat island that you would find. I'm not trying to say that it would be grass, natural grass, but it takes that urban heat island, the temperature down significantly.
But it is organic, it's
And
not
so-
plastic, and so it's like.
The infill is organic, and so
Right.
it's kind of a hybrid mix, and I applaud the city actually at being at the forefront of this and taking the steps to recognize how we can move forward. With that, I'm wondering so in terms of the fields, I'm encouraging the city to look more at these. I know that the coconut costs a little bit more, or the.
Well, there are other, it's not just a cost. Cost is not what's driving our fields. But there are other pros and cons to coconut or cork, and they are not without also an environmental footprint.
They all have environmental.
And they all have pros and cons.
Is there any option? If you put up if we look at the site plan for having any hybrid solution in that, where the just having the playing surface be
That's
the synthetic.
There's trees around the outside, so there's going to be some
So
trees.
I think what you're asking is,
For the
finish
playing
what you're
surface-
asking.
For the playing surface, where the players actually are playing, to be the synthetic surface, but then to have the surrounding area, which is not the entire field, be natural. So there's kind of a hybrid.
So that's what we want to do, and that's what we're trying to do. The issue is that the space of the field, in order to get a U14, which is what we need, we know that we need U12 and U14 fields, there is a range of official sizes, and what we're saying is let's go into the smaller size so we can try to add trees and have a natural area around the back, around the perimeter of it. And that's something that we will be in the next step of getting the money from the city council, looking at trees, looking at how that wall is rebuilt, and looking at how can we gain some of the eco-services that the field is providing now, and also provide a synthetic turf field that will allow for playing hours.
So, again, it's somewhat of a statement and question. The question is, we speak about the carbon footprint. I'm very sensitive to that. And for those, when we had the hearing 2 years ago, my family and I, we offset the carbon footprint for Capilano, Dillboy, and East Somerville. It can be done. It's like TerraPath. So incorporating that type of, like with the LEED building, there's ways to calculate. Athena Institute has done this. So we have carbon neutral fields in Somerville. Trees were planted. You can't plant them in Somerville, so we planted them in Mississippi. So there's a way of doing this mechanism of carbon offsets. It's the way that we work. I'm working in renewable fields. This is what has to be done when you're space limited, space constrained. We're buying power, renewable power from other states, and we're bringing it to Somerville. We can do the same thing with addressing the carbon footprint. I agree with the crisis. It's addressable. It's addressable by taking advantage of other locations. We do that by building it into the cost. I don't know if the city's looked at that. So offsetting the carbon footprint for the proposed synthetic turf as well.
We've not looked at that specifically, but it's a good suggestion.
I can send you, yeah, we talked before.
Okay.
Thank you, Director.
Well, before we speak, you did say you would stay here as long as it would, so
You did
if I
say
could just
that.
say, just one thing I've noticed missing is the Foss Park. And I know that's not controlled by the city, but it is going to be an all-turf field. And I'm sure that the city knows that, and that that's going to contribute greatly to the amount of playable hours. So I'm kind of surprised that that wasn't, I'm sure it's going to be a great.
So it's in the master plan. The thing to remember about Foss Park is the thing to remember about Foss Park is that we only get a percentage of those hours.
Every day.
Sure, it's in the Fields master plan, and I'm happy to.
All I want to say is,
Thank you very much for giving your time. This is a very complicated issue. There's a lot of concerns. Please make sure that you are signed up on the email and that your handwriting is legible. We can't send you an email if we can't read it. You are able to sign up through the PIP process there, and also to sign on to the parks update on the city's webpage. Thank you very much.